the end of the session. Welcome to Revolutionize Your Business with Business Process Automation. Our speakers today are Matt and Vadim.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Matt Malashevsky from CDH, and thanks for everybody to joining today's webinar about business process automation. Before we jump into the webinar, just a little bit about CDH. CDH is a consulting organization based in Michigan. Over the past 25 years, we've been solving our clients' IT needs using different tools that are available. About 15 years ago, we started building our Microsoft practice and started developing business process automation solutions. Those included out-of-the-box solutions, custom development, and utilizing other tools outside of Microsoft. About 5 years ago, we came across an organization called Nintex. Nintex is a business process automation tool which allows organizations to easily build solutions. Digitizing forms, developing the workflow processes, creating documents based upon information that is inputted in different forms, as well as connecting to a multitude of third-party applications. When we came across this tool, we decided to become a partner with them as it's the capabilities that it provides for our clients. And today we're going to be focusing on the Nintex workflow platform. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Vadim from Nintex, as he's going to be leading us through the tool set that Nintex provides.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. Now let me just present my screen. Bear with me for one moment. It's being a little bit slow. Let me know when you can see my screen, Matt.
We're good.
Okay, awesome. So what I'll do is I'll do a little quick intro of what Nintex is and what I do, what my team does, and then I'll just jump straight into it and show you what you guys can do around automating some of those business processes that you guys have current pain points with, stuff that you're doing manually. Maybe you're doing some paper-based forms that you want to automate. We'll go through a lot of that sort of stuff, and then also visibility into some of the maybe analytics behind that and see what kind of ROI you're getting if you automate those sorts of processes. So as you can see from the slide here, Nintex is all about building out those processes, getting you guys to build out the process that you have issues with at the moment. But one of the really important parts around what Nintex has also kind of like founded upon was the ability for anybody to build workflows, right? So the idea is, yes, IT are going to build out some really cool processes for you guys, but at the same time, there are subject matter experts within your different departments who know what kind of pain points they have, who know what they're doing manually right now, or even partially automating. And if you can empower those guys to be able to build out those processes, then it takes some of that load off of the IT team, and you get those almost like the ROI back really quickly. So you can see Nintex was founded in Australia. We're now an American company, even though this is a weird Aussie American accent that I have right now because I'm based over here in the States. But we've got a lot of partners like CDH that we work with very closely around getting that message out there, getting those services out there to you guys to build that sort of stuff out. So this is our NASCAR slide. You can see, and this is really less around who these customers are and more around the different kind of verticals that where Nintex actually makes sense. And it pretty much spans everything. So Nintex Workflow, Nintex Forms, all the kind of tools that make up the Nintex platform weren't really based to focus on a specific, specific industry base or specific department. It really spans the entire spectrum. So just to let you know, if anybody who's on the call who's wondering whether this makes sense for them, Nintex is being used pretty much everywhere. Okay, so who am I and why am I talking so much on this call? So my name is Vadim Tabakman, and I am the Manager of Technical Evangelism here at Nintex for the Americas. And now what that means is I have a team of extremely smart nerds who basically know our products back to front. So we've got technical evangelists, we've got sales engineers, solution architects, all those sorts of guys that all primarily do a couple of different really important things. One, if you go to some of the kind of industry events, whether it's some of the Microsoft conferences or some of the Salesforce conferences or the Box conferences, you'll see probably either myself or one of my guys there, either presenting or being a booth babe. Right, so feel free to kind of come up, ask us any questions about the platform, and we should be able to answer most of those. Now, what we also do that's really important is that we work really close with our partners. So our job is to make sure that our partners are like CDH are enabled, that they know, basically same sort of thing as us, that they know our products back to front, and they are the trusted advisors for you guys because they're probably going to be the ones that you interact with, more often than not. Okay, so last slide, because I'm not a massive fan of doing slide presentations. I love diving straight into the platform. But just to give you guys an overview of what the Nintex platform is. So it's really all about this concept of intelligent process automation, right? Where you can build out processes to do a bunch of different things. But the thing that you guys should be aware of is that nobody just uses one particular type of platform. Even though we have a lot of customers that use SharePoint, it's not all they use. There are other systems that they use, whether it's HR systems or finance or accounting or customer relationship management systems like Salesforce or Dynamics CRM. There's a lot of systems out there that our customers use. So the idea behind the Nintex platform is to make sure that you're able to automate your processes across that spectrum of systems that you use. So you'll see here where what Nintex is probably most commonly known for, and that is Nintex workflow over here on the left. Now this is all around building out those processes, and you'll see here we have a Nintex workflow for SharePoint. Now, for those on the call who have an on-prem SharePoint environment, that's what that's all about. We have an Nintex workflow for Office 365, which is the cloud version of Nintex workflow that lives inside of the Office 365 or the SharePoint Online environment. We have Nintex workflow for Project Server, and then we have Nintex Workflow Cloud, which is the idea around building out your processes in a centralized cloud environment that can interact with all your other SaaS systems and potentially some of your systems that are on-prem as well. Now, this actually, now I just noticed that this probably needs a little bit of updating, but Nintex Forms goes across Nintex Forms for SharePoint, for Office 365, and we also have one for Nintex Workflow Cloud, which I'll show you in a moment. Now, Nintex Mobile and Nintex App Studio, these two here, kind of go hand in hand. Nintex Mobile is all around giving your colleagues the ability to access all their forms in one central place, and that is a mobile app, right? Now, what that means is, as you start building out your forms across your different environments, whether it's different sites and different lists in an on-prem SharePoint environment, or whether it's across on-prem and Office 365, you want that centralized place for all their forms so they don't have to go hunting for where their certain forms are, and that's what that Nintex mobile app is about. The only downside to that app, as I'll show you in a moment, is the branding of it, right? A lot of our customers wanted to have a customized kind of branded solution for a mobile app, so that's what App Studio is all about. It's a really simple way for you to take that mobile app and brand it to be your own. Now, Nintex Hawkeye is what I mentioned earlier around, it's all great to build out these processes and build out all these forms, but what you really need to do is, after the fact, really start to get some visibility into how are your users using those, how many workflows are you guys publishing, are people submitting forms, starting off workflows, all that sort of stuff, how many processes actually have started and completed, how many have errored, that sort of stuff. It really analytics around your business processes, that's what Nintex Hawkeye is, and again, I'll touch on that in a moment. Now, in Nintex draw loop document generation, this is actually just been renamed, and I forgot to update this. And this is actually, it's called Nintex, well, there's two parts to this. There's Nintex document generation for Salesforce, and there's also just the Nintex document generation that's built into Nintex workflow. There's two little things there. Now, around Salesforce, it's the ability to generate documents, really nice, rich documents from data anywhere inside your Salesforce org, right? And then the Nintex document generation for workflow, which again I'll cover in a moment, is around having a process or a workflow that runs and generates documents for you in a similar fashion. Now, Nintex connectors is just around connecting to other systems, kind of like what I mentioned, being able to talk to all these different systems that are online that you can do later on. And then Nintex Exchange, I think, is an important one. Well, two parts of that actually as well. Nintex Exchange being a website that we have where you can collaborate and share workflows, forms, and download workflows and forms that other people have built as well. So you have to basically reinvent the wheel. Also, Nintex Exchange with, I think, a lowercase x is our customer conference that we have in a couple of weeks. So, okay, so this is the entire platform. There are some other bits to this. So, for example, I mentioned Nintex Workflow Cloud, and I'll dive into that in a moment, but there's actually 3 flavors of it, and I'll touch on that as we get there. Okay, so let's jump into the actual technology, because I think that's where you guys will start to understand more of what's actually possible, right? The art of the possible. So first of all, let's actually not jump into that one. Let's jump into this one. This is a 2016 SharePoint on-prem environment, right? Now I want to just cover where things are, how easy is it to get started, what kind of security do you guys have around this, because there's going to be some concerns there, when you start automating things. I'm going to touch on that sort of stuff. All right, so let's just dive into, we'll dive into HR. We're going to leave requests. We can pretty much go into any list. The idea is not really what the request is or what the list is, just to give you an idea of what you can start doing here. Now, the first thing to think about with an on-prem is, what do I need? What am I going to have to do to get up and running really quickly? I'm going to point out one really important thing. Installing and configuring Nintex workflow and forms for on-prem is super easy. Probably takes about 20 minutes. You don't need any extra hardware. Whatever you guys have right now in regards to hardware, we can work with that. So that's the great thing. Once you install and configure it, then in your list and libraries and your sites, you'll see things like this. Here's an Nintex workflow button in my list. And then for, Nintex forms. And for Nintex workflow, it's down here under the workflow settings, creating a workflow and managing a workflow. So here's the cool thing. I'm going to show you some stuff in here around how to quickly kind of build a form, how to quickly build a workflow. And the awesome thing is that should you guys have an on-prem environment or a hybrid environment with an on-prem and a cloud, or just cloud, or if you just want to use the ability to build workflows in a standalone cloud environment with nothing to do with SharePoint, you'll be able to do all that. And the learning curve across the different environments is next to zero, because once you actually figure out one, it basically the same sort of drag and drop type functionality moves across to the others. So let's have a look at what Nintex Forms looks like. So I'm going to click on Nintex Forms, and here's a cool little pop-up for anyone who has actually seen Nintex Forms before. They may not have seen this. This is one of our more recent releases, and that is the ability to either create a classic form or a responsive form. Now, the difference is, if I build the classic form, I can do things like move a control to a specific pixel. Let's actually pop in there for a second. Right, I can move controls wherever I want. I can overlap controls and make it basically look really ugly. So look at this form here that it's built out for me. It's all kind of pretty nice and neat, but I can drag this control here and I can move it right there if I want to. Right, that's the idea behind classic design, where I can pretty much do whatever I want. I can add some CSS, I can add some JavaScript. And the thing is, I need to think about how are people going to interact with this form if they're on a different device. This might look nice on a desktop browser, but what about a mobile browser or a mobile app, or on a completely different browser or a different device that has a really tiny screen, all that sort of stuff. You have to start thinking about different layouts. And then you'll see over here, we have our different layouts for selecting, for example, I'll select smartphone and it'll automatically readjust this, right? But now I have 2 layouts that I have to deal with, right? Now let's close this. And I'm going to pop back into Nintex Forms right there. And now I'm going to show you what the responsive form design is like. So it's a little different, but the idea is you build it once and it works across all devices, all browsers, right? Very easy. So for example, here's my title field. I can select this. I'm going to make it bigger. So I can make it as big as I want. Maybe leave the leave type as is, but start date and end date, I don't need them to be one after the other. I can drag this one across to here. But notice I have specific, almost like placeholders where I can drop controls. I can't get controls to overlap, because the idea is to build out a form that is going to automatically adjust itself depending on what device I'm on, right? So I don't have to worry about layouts or what devices or anything. This will automatically resize depending on the different devices that we're on. So this makes things really easy, and it's all about that rapid workflow or rapid process design or rapid form design. Now, even though this has built a form for me, there are other controls on the left here that you should definitely think about, that you might want to use. So let's get rid of this one. You see how it cleaned up some space. I'll get rid of that. Okay. So let's say we want to do some calculations. We have a calculated value control. I can drag over here and I can start putting together a formula to do some calculations, based on maybe some selections in my form. Or if I want, for example, this is a nice control, one of my favorites, where it's called a repeating section. So I can drag some controls into here. Let's drag another one. And what will happen is when somebody's filling in this form, let's do a preview. That way we can see exactly what an end user will be able to see without having to publish the form and almost like mess around with production. This will allow me to kind of preview it and see what it's like. So here's my form. I'm going to put in some information in here, click on add new row, and I can dynamically add new rows. Right, so think of like an expense claim type form where you don't know how many expenses your users are going to actually fill in. This is a way for them to dynamically add rows into here. And then as I added the calculated value control, I could actually add the calculated value control down here. Let's move it to the right and make it a little bit smaller. Move it to the right again, right? And this could be a calculation based off of this one. So this might be something like an amount, right? We'll call this amount, right? Which is the expense amount. And then in here, I could actually build a formula that said, go through this repeating section and calculate, do an add or a sum of all the amounts. And then I'll see a total at the bottom. Just makes things a little bit easier for that end user. So you can see how you can start building out these kind of very quick forms and very powerful. Now, I mentioned early on around getting information, talking to other systems and things like that. In some cases, you will need to talk to other systems and surface that data on your form. So right here, we have a SQL request control, so you can talk to your SQL database, maybe query some information in there, and a web request control where you can make REST calls to actually interact with another system. Could even be just SharePoint itself to either get some data, post some data, push some data out there, or put some data out there. You can do all that sort of stuff with these two controls. So really powerful controls that you have that you can start building out things. So for another really good one is a geolocation control. Imagine you build out, in this case, we are in a leave request list, but imagine you build out a leave request form and you want to know, not just when somebody's submitting in a leave request, like for example, a sick leave, but you also want to know where they are when they're submitting that information. So let's say Matt submits a leave request and he says, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to take the next 2 days off because I'm feeling a little bit sick, but the geolocation happens to say that he's at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. That's something that I would be interested in if Matt was working for me. Not that Matt would do something like that. Right, Matt? Okay, so some of the other stuff that you can do is really around getting data from SharePoint itself. We do have list lookups. If you're using managed metadata, we have that sort of functionality built into the form designer as well. Just makes things a little bit easier. Okay, now let's, and there was one other thing that I'm going to mention around anonymous forms, because that's something that a lot of our customers have been kind of aching to be able to do, and Nintex forms can actually do that for you. Now, there is an option that we actually disabled in this demo environment in here, but it's the ability to publish your form outside of your on-prem environment to something else called Nintex Live, to be able to send that form out to people outside of your SharePoint environment. So it's a really nice way to build out some very rich forms, whether it's just a questionnaire, whether it's just a regular kind of business form, or it's a survey that you can send out to people, or you can embed into an iframe and really get a lot of people to fill in the forms. The data behind it will then still go to your SharePoint list and could potentially kick off workflows. So you can kind of control all that sort of stuff with forms and workflow. Okay, so let's close this. Right. The next part is all around what do we do with the data that comes in. You'll see here we have a lot of submissions that came in. What do we do next? Number of different things you can do. The first one is you could build a workflow that runs every time somebody submits some information. That makes sense for things like leave requests, expense claims, all that sort of stuff, right? The other option, though, is if you do publish a form and it's an anonymous form, right? So somebody outside of your work can fill in that form. Potentially, there's going to be a lot of those submissions coming in. And it could be maybe a survey. Now, you don't necessarily need to process every single one of them. straight away. What might be a good idea is to send out that request, get a bunch of data submitted to your lists, and then maybe have like an end of week or end of month processing that goes and gathers all those submissions and processes them that way. That's considered a scheduled workflow, so you can do that as well. So you can see how we're trying to span the entire kind of spectrum of the types of needs that you'll need for your business process needs. Okay, so I've opened up the workflow designer. Now here we have very similar to what you saw with forms, right? Except in this case, we have our design canvas still over here on the right, and then we have all our workflow actions on the left. So for example, if I want to send an email out as soon as my workflow starts, I can just drag and drop a send notification action onto there. If I want to do some sort of calculation, I can do a math operation. Maybe it'll do that first. If I then want to maybe assign a task to somebody, you can see I can just drag and drop. Or if I put it in the wrong place, let's put it over here, right? Oops, let's do that again. I can put it over there. You can see how easy it is to build. And this is where it goes back to what I originally said, which is the idea behind all of this is that anybody should be able to build a workflow or a form, right? Now, here's some of the really cool things you can do. I can use something like an execute SQL action, which can interact with a number of different databases, whether it's SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, Progress, all that sort of stuff. So if you have some data there, you can query it, right? Get some data back and do something with it. You can insert items, you can run stored procedures, you can do a whole bunch of stuff interacting with the database. Okay, now when I tell people that, their ears perk up and they go, oh, that's interesting. We have a lot of data in databases. We could definitely use this. And then the other side of the brain starts thinking about, oh, hold on a second, I don't want to let everybody be able to do this. So then, of course, I show them some of the other cool actions you can do, like create AD user. So now I can drag an action onto my workflow to create an Active Directory user. Again, people love the idea. The people who really like that idea are the IT people, but security people look at this and go, whoa, hold on a second, we don't want to let everybody be able to create AD users. Well, a couple of things to think about, and this is where I was talking about. I'm going to make sure that you guys are aware of, some of the security things around this as well. And that is, if I open this action up, first of all, you'll notice when it comes up, and this is a VM environment, so it's being a little bit slow, so bear with me. But you'll need a number of different things in order to be able to create an AD user. One, you'll need to know a path to that environment, right? An LDAP path, and you'll need username and password. Right? Without knowing those, you're not going to be able to do anything with this anyway. So it's not as scary as one might think. But the best part about Nintex Workflow is that you can actually lock these down. So as somebody who configures the Nintex Workflow environment, or the tool, you can actually say these people can build workflows, and from those people, these people or these groups can actually use these specific actions. So you can definitely lock this down. So not everybody will see a create AD user or an execute SQL action or anything like that. So you can definitely lock it down. One thing I have noticed in the past is some of our customers will actually get some training, from say CDH. CDH will do a round of training for the HR department. Well, let's start with the IT department. I'll do some training, and then IT will have it installed, have it configured, and only people in IT can actually build workflows. That's how they would configure it. Then what they do is they'd get Matt's team to come in and do some training for HR. They'll pick a few people, maybe a handful of people. They'll go through the first round of training, and they'll give them the ability to build workflows, but only with a subset of the actions, because there's a lot of actions. As you can see, there's a bunch of categories here. You can see if I start expanding these, that there's a lot of actions that they can use. So first round is, let's go through some training and give you the ability to build workflows. We'll give you access to, say, 20 actions. You can assign tasks to people, you can do some calculations, but you can't really modify things until maybe you go through another round of training. So, and then you get access to some more actions and things like that. So there's a lot of control around who can build workflows and what actions they can actually use as well. So again, very easy to use, but at the same time, you want to make sure that people don't necessarily have access to actions where they can do something silly. I would say there are a lot of customers who just install Nintex workflow, check all the boxes, say enable all the actions, give everybody the ability to build workflows. And for the most part, I don't think they necessarily have issues, but it really, the idea is to drive some adoption of whether it's the SharePoint environment or the Salesforce environment or whatever it is. But this helps with driving that adoption. And if you just give, if you just carte blanche, give everybody access without providing any training at all, it does, it just means you'll need later on, you'll need to review a lot more, you'll need a lot more oversight over what's actually happening. Okay, so this is for an on-prem environment. So let's have a quick look at an Office 365 environment and see if there's any differences. Right, so here is an Office 365 environment. A little different in where Nintex Workflow and Nintex Forms are in the ribbon here. So I actually have the buttons right here. You can click on these buttons. This is Orchid Ltd or Limited. It's just a dummy company that I just made up yesterday, and I just created a list for it so I can start messing around with it. Now, here's what Forms looks like. Looks very similar. Still got all the same kind of controls that you see on the left. Still be able to drag and drop. All pretty much the same. I can still build rules to start, maybe hiding, showing, enabling, disabling different parts of the form based on certain conditions. Like, should this person see this part of the form? If somebody submits their expenses, I want to make sure that once they submit it, a manager has the ability to go over it and maybe tweak it a little bit. Maybe some of the names are incorrect or some of the options were selected incorrectly, but maybe I don't want the original person who submitted it to make any modifications to it, especially after it's been approved or declined. I want to make sure I lock that down, and you can add these rules to start enabling or disabling or even hiding certain controls off the form. So you have all the sort of same sort of functionality that you saw in the on-prem version. Now, before I move on, I'm going to touch on the mobility part. I mentioned the Nintex mobile app and an App Studio. I'm just going to show you the mobile app. So I'm going to click on the mobile app that I've installed. This is a Windows version, but you can get an Android and an iPhone. Notice the big logo. And, oh, I must have changed my password, so that's why I'm getting that little message. But notice how it says Nintex Mobile there, Nintex X, which is one of our logos, Nintex Mobile up there. It's very much branded to be Nintex, right? Now, great for you guys on the call, not so great for your colleagues who probably don't know what Nintex is. And that's what the whole idea of App Studio is. App Studio is around maybe being able to rename this app, being able to change the logos, the colors, all that sort of stuff. If I go to my forms, you'll see these are all the forms that I have access to. So if I go and select this BYOD survey, right, I've got orange, it's kind of bland. I can, with App Studio, I can actually brand this to make it my own. So if you guys have a corporate color scheme, this will allow you to brand this app to make it your own. Then you can deploy it to your end users and all that sort of stuff. So it's a nice way. It's very quick and easy to do it. It probably takes about 5 minutes. I think App Studio is basically 4 pages of kind of form stuff that you fill in, but it's all very straightforward and very simple to do. But you can see I have all my forms. I can group them so I know all these different, so I select finance, and there's my finance one with my 2 forms in there. Kind of unusual, I have 2 expense reports, but you can see you can start grouping your form, make it a little bit easier for your end users to find their forms. Okay, yeah, the good thing about that app is that it can bring in forms from your on-prem, your 365, and your Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. Okay, so let's have a look at what does workflow look like in Office 365. Now, when I click on Nintex Workflow, this is what you see. So I have a workflow already in here. I can click on Create List Workflow. Notice it looks very similar to that on-prem environment. Still drag and drop. You still have similar sort of functionality, not exactly the same, because there is a difference between on-prem and a cloud environment. So there's going to be some actions that may not be in the cloud environment just because it doesn't make any sense from a cloud environment. Like, for example, upload a document to a shared folder, like a mapped drive or something like that, right? There's no such concept in a cloud environment, but on-prem there is. That's kind of some of the differences that you will see. So very, very simple to move from on-prem to Office 365 in regards to kind of the learning curve. Now, the difference when it comes to the Nintex Workflow Cloud environment is that what we're looking at here is Office 365 and its Nintex Workflow, Nintex Forms in 365, so we have some context. We have an environment that we live in. Now I'm going to pop over here And this is the Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. So this is a workflow environment where you can build your workflows to interact with a number of different systems, right? First of all, you need to think about your connections. What systems am I going to connect to? I'll pop in here just for a second, just so you guys can get an idea. So you can see we've got Adobe, we've got Azure, we have Box, we have DocuSign, we have OneDrive, SQL, even Salesforce, and down here I have an Office 365 mark because you can talk to Office 365 from here as well. If you're interested in maybe sending text messages to your end users or even to your customers via a workflow, we have a Twilio connector, so you can start automating that sort of stuff as well. Now let's see what's the difference between this environment then and the on-prem and Office 365. I'm going to click on Create Workflow. Now with the SharePoint environments, when it comes to a workflow, I mentioned a scheduled workflow, but what I was building there was a list workflow, right? So you can schedule that if you want, but you can also have that workflow start when somebody creates an item in a list or modifies an item or uploads a document, things like that. With Nintex Workflow Cloud, it's a little different. I'm going to click on this start event because now I need to select which environment am I dealing with that I want to capture an event from. Now I've got my Box environment, I've got Dropbox, I've got Dynamics CRM, OneDrive, Salesforce, Twilio's, and then I've got Nintex. I'll cover Nintex in a moment. What I'm going to do is cover a couple little things in here. I'm going to close this. Notice it's still the same type of interface. It's still drag and drop, right? I want to send an email, I could do that. Express approval, it's like that flexi task where you have approve, reject, or whatever other responses. So it's very easy to start building these types of workflows out, regardless of which environment you're in. But this is Nintex Workflow Cloud. Think of it as kind of like a standalone cloud environment. What we recently also released is for Salesforce. You'll notice in here there's something called Nintex Workflow for Salesforce Forum. So there is actually an app for Salesforce for Nintex Workflow Cloud where you can actually build your workflows inside of Salesforce and do some similar sort of thing to what you see here. Capture events. You have some context. It's always very similar to the SharePoint one, where you start to capture those events and start doing stuff with them, like somebody created a contact or modified an account. I want to do something with it. Or in this case, I want a form to appear on my, say, accounts. So let's actually select an environment here. Let's do that one. And then you select what kind of object are we dealing with. So let's say account. So whenever somebody goes into the account object, I want to be able on the right to see a form. And when somebody fills in that form, clicks on OK or submit, it kicks a workflow off in the Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. So you have that sort of functionality. But at the same time, you also have the ability to capture the events like somebody created a new record or updated a record. And the same sort of thing with the other environments like Box as well. We want to capture somebody uploads a new document, creates a new folder, updates some metadata, or this one down here is, if you guys are using Box, I want to be able to have a bunch of people collaborating on a document. Once we have the okay from everybody and they made the appropriate changes, the owner of that document can actually go to that document and say, okay, I want to start this workflow off. It'll pop up with these are your list of workflows that you can start. So you can see how we're trying to make it really easy for you guys to start building out those processes. Now, so this is kind of like the Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. Now, I showed you how you can start workflows off of these things, events from other SaaS systems. Down here, we have Nintex because we have our own connector and we have 3 ways of starting off workflows. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Here, I can build a form. I can put whatever controls I want. If I click on design, you'll see it looks very similar to the responsive design type form that I was showing you earlier. So it's very easy, drag and drop, and it's just going to work nicely across all the devices. Now, this is an anonymous form. So the great thing about this is that I could actually have a form, and I'll give you an example here. Let's go here. Here's one of my Nintex Workflow Cloud forms, and I can put in here, and I'll say Santa's little helper, and I'll just put in a fake email address. I'll just do it on mine. And then I'll select a couple of controls, a couple of documents, click on OK, and click Submit. Now, here's the cool thing that's happening behind the scenes. This is going to kick off a workflow in Nintex Workflow Cloud, and I'll actually see in a moment here. You can see this is 9:33 a.m. If I refresh this, I should see another workflow start. And there you go, at 11:07, I have one that's in progress, and I can click on this and I can see what's actually happening, right? It's creating an item somewhere, logging some information, doing some tests, going through those attachments, right? Iterate through those attachments that I attached to that form, and I'm doing something with those. The cool thing behind this is an anonymous form. It's taking all the data from the form and the attachments, and if I come over here to my 365 environment and I refresh this, you'll see in a moment there's Santa's little helper, right? I can click on this. This is going to bring up a Nintex form that I happened to build on that list earlier. You'll see the data I filled in, Santa's little helper, email address, and the 2 images that were attached to that form. So this is a way for you to start having anonymous forms that people can fill in and take that data and then basically pump it into your 365 environment. You have the same concept of anonymous forms via Nintex Workflow Cloud. The cool thing about this is that when you look at Nintex as a platform, it is a true platform. You're not looking at, I want to get just the on-prem version or just the 365 version. You'll be able to build workflows wherever it makes sense for you to build workflows. I get that question a lot, which is, well, does it make more sense to build a workflow in on-prem, or should I build an Nintex Workflow Cloud or Office 365, or like, what's the best way to do this? There's not necessarily a best way to do it. The best way to do it is what makes sense to you guys, but also, where do you want that data to be? Where do you want that to go? If it's just for internal use and you have an on-prem environment and it makes sense to build it there, build it there. If you want to interact with Salesforce and that's all you need to do, maybe it's an Nintex Workflow Cloud, you build that workflow. But it's all around you guys making the decisions of what makes sense to you. And if it gets a little confusing, that's what the CDH guys are for. They'll be able to kind of help you out, point you in the right direction. So let's have a quick look. We have a few more minutes. Let's have a quick look at what happened to that workflow that ran when I submitted this particular form. And I'm going to go right here and show you what that looks like. So I built this out yesterday. Not very complicated. There's the form. So I have a start event. I click on design form and you'll see this is the form that I filled in. So pretty straightforward. Dragged a few controls onto here and an image. And then once I have all that data, this logo here, this little icon, that's a SharePoint online icon. So this is going to create that item in that SharePoint list. I'm going to go through here. I'm going to make sure it was actually created. There's that message around iterate through action attachments, because we're going to go through a loop and grab all those attachments, all those documents, so you don't have to hard code your workflow to handle, oh, this form is going to have 1 document or 2 document attachments. This is smart enough to go through and iterate through each one of those. And then we're going to add those to that item that we created. And then finally, right down the bottom, we have this update an item action. I have a field on my 365 list that basically says it's called start workflow. By default set to no. This says set it to yes. And all that means is that once this is done, we're done with this. All the data now lives in our Office 365 list. And I'll show you in a moment, if I go down here, oops, there we go, click on more and click on workflow, you'll actually see that our workflow started right there. There's my process anonymous request workflow. It doesn't do anything other than log a message, so it should just say workflow processing or something like that in the workflow history. Yeah, there you go. But what that meant was that workflow would not start until I, 1, create the item in the list, and 2, attach all the appropriate attachments to it. And then my Nintex Workflow Cloud workflow tells my 365 environment, okay, now you can start your workflow and do the actual processing. So you can see how, did it make sense to build a workflow in Office 365 or just in Nintex Workflow Cloud? This was just like a bit of a hybrid type scenario where I wanted the idea of having anonymous forms. So Nintex Workflow Cloud had that. So I built it there. Have the workflow there, grab all that data, and then just send it to Office 365. Now the real processing begins and we start going through the data, going through the attachments, going through approval processes, etc. So you can see there's no one perfect answer for any particular situation. There's a number of different ways you can do the same sort of thing, but again, if you're not sure which is the best way to do it, I would definitely recommend some training or getting the CDH guys in to kind of help you out with that. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to point out is I have Nintex workflow, I have Nintex forms. People are building out forms and workflows. People are using them. I've invested in this. Now I want to see, are people actually using it to the level that I want? Am I getting that type of ROI that I was hoping for, right? By replacing manual processes with automated process, replacing paper with digital forms. Is this working? This is what this is all about. This is the Nintex Hawkeye environment. This is where you get visibility into how things are going and how your processes are going. So number one, you'll see these green boxes. These are they're called the usage lens. So this is where it'll tell you right here, how many workflows have you guys published? How many published events have occurred? This might be, if you look at this little graph on the right, this might be Matt's team comes in and provides some training. All of a sudden you see a spike in workflows being published, right? Great. Means people are, learned a lot from the training. They know what their pain points are. They're going to start building out those processes. All of a sudden, there's a lull in workflows being published. So then you might say, well, let's get the HR guys in and Matt's team in to do a little quick training for the finance team. And this way you can get CDH to level set the training of the product and how best to kind of use it. And you have the HR guys come in and say, these are the types of things that worked for us. All of a sudden, you'll see a spike in workflows being published now for the finance. So this is that sort of visibility that you guys will get to see. There's other things you can do, right? Publish workflows is interesting, but number of instances is actually probably more interesting because this is how many times you've automated something that you probably did manually before, right? This is a very tiny VM environment, so you see only 2,900. In one of the environments that Nintex has, we have somewhere around 800,000 instances that have run just in the last, I think, 6 months. So you'll see that kind of ROI there. That's pretty awesome. Now, I'm going to go back to workflow just for a moment. I'm going to go over here. Now, as you start building out your process, I'm going to just check on the time to make sure we're cognizant of that. Last thing to talk about is, as you start building out your workflows, remember that the data behind your workflows will make sense to you guys, but not necessarily make a whole lot of sense to the Nintex product. We'll know it's text, it's numbers, it's dates, things like that, but we don't really understand the meaning behind those and the meaning of those for your business. So what you can do is use right there, actions under the Hawkeye category, where you can send data up to Hawkeye. So for example, I can come in here and I can just say expense total and insert a value in there. I can say department and insert the name of the department. That way you're sending that data up to Nintex Hawkeye to then be able to report on that. And that is what the blue things are about. These are called process intelligence lenses. So this is where you can use Nintex Hawkeye as a data repository or data warehouse and be able to then build out dashboards to report on that data. And here's an example of one that was built for an expense claim where you can see across the years, you can see how much was spent on flights, on meals, on software, subscriptions, etc. And you can start getting a better understanding of the business and then potentially later on, changing your budgeting around, okay, we probably need to have more budget for, in this case, for travel. Maybe this is hotels and things like that. You can come over here and go, let's look up, just overall claims that have been submitted and how much, again, helps with budgeting. But you can also see down here, all the departments are pretty much spending the same amount of money. What if you find that that sales is spending a lot, and then marketing is spending a lot, management is spending hardly anything? So adjust the budgets accordingly. But this allows you guys to build out your workflows and send up the data that makes sense to you to be able to report on. So that's kind of like the overall platform for Nintex. I know we have around about 13 minutes or so left. Matt, what do you think? I'll pass it back to you, and maybe we can open it up for some questions that we can tackle.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you, Aiden.
All right, I'll make you the presenter, Matt.
We did have a couple of questions come in while you were talking. So real quickly, let's see here. Does Nintex Workflow Cloud integrate with SharePoint on-premise?
That is a great question. So although there are no actions specifically for Nintex Workflow Cloud to talk to SharePoint on-prem, what we do have is we do have some web service actions that allow you to talk to web services on-prem. And I know there's a number of web services in an on-prem SharePoint environment that you'll be able to either query for items or documents. You'll be able to create, update, do all that sort of stuff. So you'll definitely be able to do that sort of stuff. One of the things that I didn't cover is the idea of building a workflow that has an external start. And what that means is it's almost like building little reusable workflows. So you could potentially build a generic workflow in Nintex Workflow Cloud to talk to your on-prem environment and then be able to reuse that across your other workflows as well as just simple drag and drop single actions.
Okay. Do you purchase Nintex based upon platform?
Good question. So it's actually one entire platform. There's basically two kind of licensing ways. One is a standard license and another one is the enterprise license, but it's all around, I want to build intelligent processes. I want to build workflows. And then let's say you decide across the year, I'm probably going to build 50 workflows, 50 workflow designs. And then you can use those 50 workflow designs wherever you want. You can build them, some of them on-prem, some of them in 365, some of them in Nintex Workflow Cloud. You can build all of them in on-prem. It's completely up to you. If right now you're in an on-prem environment only, maybe in the future you're going to move to a 365 environment, or maybe in the future you're going to start using some of those SaaS providers out there. It's still the same thing. You're still buying some number of workflows, like say 50 workflows. You'll build some of those on-prem, and as you start moving over to a hybrid environment where you start doing some work in 365, you can start building workflows there as well. You don't have to worry about, oh, this is another licensing, this is more licensing or anything like that, or a different product. It's all covered by the platform license, basically.
Okay, thank you. With repeating sections, does each new data entry point create a SharePoint list item?
That's a good question. No, it doesn't, unless you build your workflow to do that for you. So what happens behind the scenes with repeating sections is that in your list, there'll be a hidden field called form data. Now, form data is basically an XML representation of that form. So let's say you have a form with 10 controls on there, 10 data entry controls. Maybe 5 of them, or let's say 9 of them are linked to fields in your list. All that data, when somebody fills in that form, will go to those fields. That 10th control that you have on the form, if it's not connected to a field, it's going to go to that form data hidden field as just a little bit of XML. And the same thing happens for repeating sections, right? Where the data behind the repeating section is going to go as XML into that form data field. Now, it's pretty straightforward to build a workflow to then grab all the data from that repeating section, maybe do some calculations, or just iterate through each one of those rows, grab the data, and dump it into a SharePoint list, dump it into a database, something like that. Recently, I had the request of, we need to take that data from a repeating section and we need to put it into another SharePoint list. But at the same time, we want to make sure that if somebody goes in and modifies that repeating section and adds another row or modifies an item, I want the workflow to update those other items in that list that it created. So, kind of build that little workflow out. And then vice versa, they said, we need to also cater for the fact that if somebody goes to that other list and opens up one of those items and makes a change, that the repeating section automatically shows the updated data. So we built a little workflow that did that as well. So all that sort of stuff is doable, but that just goes to show you how flexible the workflow platform is, because you can pretty much build out whatever you need for your business needs. So it's really, really powerful.
That's great. Let's see, I believe one more question. Can you do cascading fields?
Yes. So with the list lookup control in the form designer, you can actually say, I want to look up this particular list, say a country's list, and then have another list lookup that says, I want to then, based off of that country selection, find me all the major cities or the states or the territories. So you can do kind of like that cascading drop-down functionality in there. Pretty straightforward. Just have as long as you have the data in those SharePoint lists, you'll be able to do that sort of stuff. You can do the same thing with the SQL requests or the database queries as well.
Great, and I think that is all the questions that we have at this time.
Awesome.
So once again, I'd like to thank both Matt and Vadim for today's presentation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to sales@cdh.com or to Matt directly at mattm@cdh.com. Have a great day and talk to you soon.